Somewhere in Southeast Asia, there's a lost mega hoard of treasure that could very feasibly make you a multi-billionaire. While hunting for it, you might stumble upon the other insane things people have lost over the years. Massive treasure-filled ships that disappeared in mysterious circumstances, mountains that dematerialized overnight, and even entire towns that up and vanished. All this and more as we dive into the irresistible mystery of the most ludicrously large things humans have lost. In this spot, at the bottom of the Baltic Sea, something is seriously wrong. The ripped, shredded electricity cables provide a clue. It's 8:20 p.m. on an August night in 2019, and precisely 5 minutes ago, an enormous underwater machine vanished from this very spot. The machine in question was an advanced underwater observatory, which for the past 3 years sat 72 feet below the surface in this region of restricted waters, where it was thought to be safe. That evening, the Helmholtz Center for Ocean Research in Germany was monitoring the station when the signal suddenly died. Hoping it was just a transmission error, divers were swiftly dispatched, and once they arrived at the site, they quickly identified the problem. The machine was gone. The only thing left was its frayed power cable, making it look like some colossal creature had simply made the observatory its supper. The $340,000 machine was huge, heavy, and unwieldy, weighing in at almost a ton. Marine animals couldn't have carried it away, at least not ones we know about. Neither could the waves, according to the platform's designers. Investigators instead suspected criminals were afoot. Some sources suggest the platform may have been swept up, unintentionally or otherwise, by ships illegally trawling the seafloor, which is in a restricted no-fishing zone. Illegal trawling like this has been known to occasionally be the culprit for destruction of undersea structures in the past. Others suggest it may have been a more targeted attack from Germany's enemies, looking to acquire the undersea environmental data for reasons unknown. A definitive reason for the disappearance has never been agreed. Even when one chunk of the observatory turned up 6 months later, with its sensors badly damaged and/or removed, no one could definitively say who or what was responsible. Was it Russia? Was it Americans dressed up as Russians? Was it aliens dressed up as Americans dressed up as Russians? Let me know what you think down in the comments. Let's move on to much bigger and infinitely more valuable things. Somewhere on Earth there lurks a hidden treasure trove containing more gold than you could spend in several lifetimes. They call it Yamashita's treasure. The trove is named after General Tomoyuki Yamashita, the Tiger of Malaya, who played a central role in the Japanese invasion of Southeast Asia in World War II. According to historians, Yamashita's forces looted over 6,000 tons of gold and countless other valuables from banks, museums, and homes throughout the region. That's roughly 30 concrete trucks full of gold, worth about $600 billion in today's money. The story goes that the Japanese leadership ordered Yamashita to build a network of tunnels into a Filipino mountain range, in which to hide the loot until World War II was over. To ensure secrecy, all forced laborers and officers who built the tunnels were sealed inside to perish, minimizing how many people knew about the tunnels. General Yamashita didn't survive long after the war. He was tried for war crimes and, well, let's just say he met a very final end. Following Yamashita's demise and the defeat of Japan, the location of this motherlode of gold fell into wild speculation. Then, decades after the end of the war, one chunk of the golden treasure trove was finally found, and it came with a truly crazy story. In the late 60s, a Filipino locksmith named Rogelio Roxas received a map from the son of a former Japanese soldier. The map reportedly pointed Roxas to one of General Yamashita's personal vaults, known as Tunnel 8, in the mountains near the city of Baguio in the Philippines. In the ensuing years, after receiving a permit from the local government, Roxas led several grueling dig attempts in the area. Eventually, in 1971, it proved worth it. He stumbled into a man-made chamber which had in fact become a tomb. Skeletal remains of Japanese soldiers lined the floor beside weapons and radios. Further delving revealed something equally astonishing laying in wait: a giant golden Buddha gleaming in the darkness. The Buddha's head was removable, and hidden inside were several handfuls of uncut diamonds. Accompanying it were wooden cases of gold bullion, a handful of samurai swords, and several other invaluable valuable artifacts which confirmed this was the treasure trove they'd been seeking. Over the coming weeks, with 10 of his strongest men, Roxas hauled the 3-foot, 1-ton golden Buddha out of its hiding spot. And then they blasted the tunnel shut again, sealing in any remaining treasures away from prying eyes for now. Roxas took the Buddha back to his home alongside another case of gold. Unfortunately, whispers of the riches found their way back to the dictator-president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos. Marcos and his troops raided Roxas' home, seizing the treasure and imprisoning Roxas. Roxas was subject to terrible treatment as the dictator's men attempted to squeeze info from him, but he remained silent on the whereabouts of the tunnel until his release years later. The story didn't end there, though. The dictator was deposed in 1986, and 2 years later, Roxas sued his estate for the value of the stolen treasure, and not just the stuff in his house. Unfortunately, it seems Marcos's regime rediscovered Roxas' sealed treasure tunnel on their own and claimed the treasure. Soldiers were witnessed moving countless crates from the dig site in the 70s, and efforts by the dictator to re-smelt large quantities of gold at the time were made public over the course of the trial. After decades of trials, the court ruled in Roxas' favor. But by this time, both he and Marcos were dead and buried. So the multi-million-dollar reparations were billed to Marcos' estate, which are still being fought for to this day by Roxas' descendants. But that was just one piece of this allegedly colossal war treasure trove. Not all of the spoils of war ended up in the tunnels in the mountains of the Philippines. 44 tons of gold, 12 tons of platinum, roughly 66 pounds of diamonds, alongside a large amount of high-value artwork, were rumored to have been separated from the main loot and secretly loaded aboard the MV Awamaru. This Japanese civilian ocean liner was mistakenly sunk by U.S. forces in April 1945 after being misidentified as a battleship. Whatever precious cargo was aboard, alongside over 2,000 souls, were lost as it sank to the bottom of the Taiwan Strait. Any significant treasure aboard has never officially been recovered, although some suspect China salvaged it in the 1970s. The Chinese government spent $100 million on a salvage operation seeking the ship, which official Chinese sources say turned up nothing of real importance. Some folks believe China's keeping its true discoveries quiet. However, U.S. intelligence agencies have analyzed Japanese communications documents from the time, which indicate pretty strongly that any treasure that might have been aboard the Awamaru was offloaded toward Thailand long before the wreckage. The intelligence agencies of the U.S. themselves are also a prime suspect in the disappearance of Yamashita's war gold. Historians have suggested that a significant chunk of Yamashita's treasures were either given to, recovered, or stolen by the CIA, with the spoils being used to fund covert projects through the mid to late 20th century. Most information pertaining to the recovery of major Japanese loot from World War II is classified, but several high-ranking ex-CIA officials have, over the years, provided some mind-blowing testimonies. These ex-staff have stated that massive amounts of recovered Japanese gold, with estimates in the billions of dollars worth, were taken by the U.S., stored in slush funds and offshore bank accounts, and used to fund covert CIA operations for years. These claims have been backed up by reputable investigative journalists, though definitive proof, or an official admission by the U.S. government, remains elusive. Unfortunately, aside from Rogelio Roxas' discovery, the bulk of Yamashita's treasure has never officially been recovered. Some experts on the treasure suggest there could be 18 golden Buddhas out there in total, hidden across 172 possible locations, with the possibility of so much treasure still waiting to be found. It's good news for all you treasure hunters. Now get out there. So, as we've already seen, some astoundingly big things can be completely lost. But even so, how do you lose an entire town? Well, just ask Roanoke. Back in 1587, Roanoke became the first permanent English colony in the Americas, and would soon be host to one of the most notorious mysteries in North American history. Founded just off what is today the coast of North Carolina, the colony got off to a rough start. The first attempt to settle it in 1585 was abandoned due to lack of food and resources, alongside tensions with local indigenous tribes. The 1587 settlement stuck around for longer, with families settling into newly built homes. Supplies were still a challenge, though, so the mayor, John White, sailed the long journey back across the Atlantic to England to request support and goods. He returned to Roanoke 3 years later, delayed by war between England and Spain, only to be totally shocked by what he found. Everyone had vanished. 85 men, 17 women, and 13 children were all gone. The only clue was the word Croatoan carved into a tree, and the letters CRO carved into other trees nearby. This word stood out to John. It was the name of Croatoan Island, which lay about 30 miles down the shoreline. With this one clue, John reboarded his vessel and ventured south. Tragically, though, his ensuing investigation and potential rescue attempt was cut short by severe weather and lack of resources, and he was forced to abandon the search before he could even set foot on Croatoan Island. With no port for safe harbor and completely out of money, White was forced to return to England for good. He never saw his missing family again. Croatoan Island, today called Hatteras Island, was home to offshoots of the Hatteras Native American tribe, who'd occupied the area for 10,000 years. These guys potentially could have served as saviors for the colonists if the settlers had been run out of town by less friendly neighbors, or if they ran out of supplies. But any evidence of this is rare, if not non-existent. Investigations over the centuries have revealed only vague, hard-to-prove word-of-mouth claims. Some suggested the Roanoke colonists had been wiped out in an attack. Others reported the presence of tribespeople with white European features around Croatoan Island, suggesting settlers integrated into the tribes. However, no widely accepted, tangible evidence one way or the other has ever been found to confirm this theory. The mystery of the lost colony continues to this day, leaving the question, just what exactly came out of the tree line at Roanoke that caused a whole village to disappear? So we've theorized how a village can be lost, but how about an entire city? Today, below the hustle and bustle of the lively Mexico City streets, lies an incredibly dark secret: the remains of Tenochtitlan, a great city torn down and lost forever. The mind-blowing Aztec capital city that once stood there was built on islands within Lake Texcoco in the early 14th century. The city boasted a population of roughly 400,000 people within 5 square miles of land, with impressive mud and stone land bridge causeways wide enough to accommodate 10 horses side by side, connecting it to the mainland. These causeways featured gates and drawbridges and were skirted by aqueducts and canals. The city hosted countless incredible temples, enormous markets, floating gardens, and even a zoo, and was the largest concentration of people in Mesoamerican history. The city's grandeur, however, couldn't protect it from the Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés, sent to the Americas in 1519 to colonize them. By 1521, Cortés was leading a force of his own men combined with an armed alliance of the Aztecs' indigenous enemies. With these merged forces, after many fierce battles and brutal conquest missions, Cortés seized Tenochtitlan and placed it under Spanish rule. But he wasn't done there. In an effort to erase the Aztec influence from the continent, Cortés soon ordered the total destruction of the capital city. After the initial widespread destruction during the violent siege of Tenochtitlan, Cortés effectively enslaved the survivors and forced them to demolish their city, dismantling structures and monuments, and rebuild it in Spanish style. This included tearing down the Grand Templo Mayor and building a Catholic church in its place. All in all, the new overhauled settlement would be called Mexico City. Nowadays, aside from sporadic ruins, almost nothing remains of Tenochtitlan, not even the lake on which it was built. Over the years, the lake has been gradually filled in for construction as Mexico City expanded. As you can see in this comparison map, only relatively small fragments of Lake Texcoco remain. But here's the kicker. Due to the soft, wet ground it's been constructed on, Mexico City is sinking by the year, as much as 20 inches annually in certain areas. Perhaps the lake will reclaim the land over time, and this city built on a city may one day also disappear, like the one before it. Let's sail out on a perilous trip into the oceans now. In February 1918, an enormous ship disappeared in terrifying, baffling circumstances that left the world in fear of what lurked out in the deep blue. Let's set the scene. World War I was raging. The American Navy had just sent the USS Cyclops on a mission that would become legend. The USS Cyclops was a huge cargo vessel stretching 542 feet long and 65 feet wide. As part of a routine operation, she was ordered to carry 10,000 tons of coal to Brazil, then bring 11,000 tons of manganese ore back to Virginia. Having unloaded the coal in Rio and restocked with the manganese, she was supposed to embark on a 4,800 nautical mile journey through the Atlantic, directly back home. However, records show that with only 1,800 miles left, she made an unscheduled stop in Barbados to address concerns about the ship being overloaded. The crew had noted the vessel was sitting too low in the water, causing worries. Details are unclear about whether the ship was relieved of some excess weight before setting back off, but the next day, she had departed once more on her route home. This adjusted route, however, took her straight through the Bermuda Triangle, a chaotic, unpredictable stretch of the North Atlantic, home to countless accursed voyages and mysterious vanishings. This journey would fall into those same categories. After the people of Barbados watched the USS Cyclops fade into a speck on the horizon, the 309 souls aboard were never seen again. There were no reports of distress signals, no discovered lifeboats, not so much as a single fragment of metal from the ship was to this day ever recovered. The disappearance of the 542-foot behemoth alongside its lucrative payload triggered countless investigations and searches, leading to little more than vague theories. One involves the first-hand account of Officer Conrad A. Nerving, who sailed with the Cyclops to Rio. Nervig claimed the ship's captain, Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley, was widely disliked among crew for his irrational outbursts and poor decision-making. Like how the only officer with experience transporting manganese ore was arrested and locked up in his room after a trivial disagreement with the captain. The captain then loaded all the ore onto the ship without the expert's help. Incorrect storage of heavy material can put stress on a ship's hull, and in extreme cases, can cause boats to split into pieces and sink quickly without warning. As far as Nervig's concerned, the captain's rash choices meant that there's a good chance the overloaded Cyclops disintegrated and sank. Other theories similarly attribute the sinking to the general top-down disorganization of the ship. Some theorize the improper storage of manganese caused it to react with a seawater breach, producing hydrogen gas in confined corners of the ship, which later exploded. Others point to reports of pre-existing hull damage that had supposedly been ignored by the captain. Other historians, meanwhile, suggest a mutiny might have taken place against the captain, causing chaos aboard the vessel, conditions in which any engineering, weather-related, or structural damage issue would become almost impossible to deal with properly. The most popular theories at the time, by contrast, argued German U-boats were the culprits. After all, America had entered World War I at this point, and a ship full of manganese, which was intended to be used for steel production relating to munitions, was a very worthy target indeed. However, later analysis of German military records indicate that there was no German presence in that part of the Atlantic at the time, and Germany never took credit for it. The other, more fringe theory suggests the colossal vessel succumbed to an attack from an even more colossal monster from the depths, something like a giant octopus of the Kraken legend. While we don't exactly have evidence of a sea monster, some believe targeted attacks from the depths can explain how 50 ships and 20 airplanes have mysteriously vanished in the Bermuda Triangle over the years. Whether it be through long-forgotten oceanic giants, secretive military experiments, or even an underwater alien civilization, there's no shortage of sinister explanations of the zone offered by theorists around the world. Whatever the contents of the Bermuda Triangle might be, what's certain is the area is home to a fierce tropical tropical air currents, which whip up the sea into a serious nautical hazard zone throughout the year. And with extreme seafloor terrain, parts of which plunge to 28,000 feet deep and beyond, locating and recovering wreckages is extremely difficult. Regardless of what may lurk within it, the true monster of the Bermuda Triangle will always be the terrifying Deep Blue herself. And it's very possible that the sheer power of this sea pulled the Cyclops, and many like it, down into her depths. The ocean is, of course, far from the only place where strange, shocking disappearances occur. The Bamiyan Valley, Afghanistan, for instance, is home to a collection of colossal oddities. In these mountainous hills, there's several giant humanoid-shaped gaps, but their occupants have seemingly walked off. For 1,500 years, these rock faces used to be home to two giant Buddhas, measuring 115 and 175 feet, respectively. Then in 2001, the unthinkable happened. The giant statues disappeared. But this wasn't a sneaky theft or supernatural vanishing. This was the intention of some very bad folks. The Taliban, a group who had gripped the region in terror, blew the beautiful statues up, destroying the religious symbols to please their own god. This was generally considered a move. Now, their shelters are all that remain. Ironically, the Taliban have now opened the area to tourists. For $5, you can now marvel at holes in the wall. Great. Thanks a lot, guys. Unfortunately, though, as you're about to see, ancient giants have a tendency to disappear. The Colossus of Rhodes, the 108-foot bronze statue of the sun god Helios, once stood triumphantly over the harbor of ancient Greece's marvelous city of Rhodes. Constructed to celebrate a military victory in the 4th century BCE, the bronze plate behemoth was 2/3 the size of the Statue of Liberty and was officially the tallest statue of the ancient world. Pliny the Elder, a 1st century Roman writer with a name that sounds straight out of Dark Souls, recorded that it took 300 people 12 years to finish the Colossus. When it was finally complete in 280 BCE, it stood for 54 years until an earthquake brought it down. The Egyptian pharaoh of the time, Ptolemy III, offered to pay for its repair, but an oracle warned that Rhodes would be doomed if the fallen Colossus was moved. And so, in a truly peculiar twist of history, the ruins were left where they lay for over 800 years, still deemed so impressive that people would flock to see the fallen giant's remains. Pliny the Elder noted that the statue was so big, entire trade caravans would camp inside one of the cracked open arms. Today, the Colossus's remains are sadly long gone, and the question of to where remains something of a mystery. Historians theorize that the ruins degraded over time, as Rhodes underwent various invasions and changes in leadership, under rule of Christians and Muslims, who had no desire to maintain what they viewed as a heathen artifact. One slightly dubious account suggests a merchant from Upper Mesopotamia, modern-day Syria, was allowed to buy and melt down the Colossus, transporting its pieces elsewhere using 900 camels. What form those repurposed bronze pieces eventually took and where they might be today is a fun mystery to ponder. I've got my fingers crossed my brass bathroom doorknob was once the Colossus's molar. Let's move on to something more recent now, and much more horrifying. In February 1958, a U.S. Air Force B-47 bomber on a routine training mission off the coast of Savannah, Georgia, collided with its support, an F-86 fighter jet. In the ensuing chaos, the B-47's pilot feared his payload was damaged and might explode on landing. So he decided to drop the payload into the waters just off Tybee Island, Georgia. It sounds reasonable until you hear the payload was a 7,600-pound Mark 15 nuclear bomb. That's right, a bomb with 190 times more destructive power than the Fat Man dropped on Nagasaki in 1945 had just fallen onto American soil, or rather, American waters. For reference, if this had detonated, it would have had enough blast radius to effectively wipe San Francisco off the map if it had fallen over the city. Now, a nuke by design is very unlikely to detonate without following a specific set of technical steps. However, with 1950s nuclear tech, there wasn't total certainty that a crash landing impact wouldn't trigger the implosion necessary to start a nuclear reaction. Mercifully, the pilot saw no explosion as the jettisoned bomb hit the sea, but it still posed threats from its nuclear payload. After all, a nuke isn't something you want floating free for anyone to stumble across. In the aftermath, 100 of the Navy's best divers spent 2 months searching. And while they recovered some live Civil War-era cannonballs, the nuke was never found. The official conclusion was that the bomb lies, to this day, somewhere off the Georgia coast, submerged in several feet of silt. For a long time, experts argued that the bomb was a dummy and contained no actual nuclear material. But in 1994, declassified documents strongly suggested the bomb had a fully functioning plutonium core. With or without the nuclear core, the bomb definitely contained 400 pounds of conventional explosives, so either way, not good. It wasn't the last nuclear bomb the responsible folks in the US government lost. 6 nukes have been lost in total over the years in various circumstances. And if that's not a ludicrously large loss, then I don't know what is. Anyone else super freaked out by that statistic? Let me know down in the comments below. For almost a century, one of the world's most valuable rooms has been missing. The Amber Room was once the pride of Russia, and its gold-slicked contents were so decadent, it's estimated that this singular room's entire value comes to around $500 million in today's money. Its magnificent walls were fashioned out of amber, aka fossilized tree resin, and skirted with glimmering mirrors, glittering gold leaf, and astonishing gemstone-laden carvings. It was, at the time of its completion in the 18th century, often referred to as the 8th wonder of the world. So just how the heck did someone manage to lose it? Well, no one's got a definitive answer, and its whereabouts today remain one of the biggest mysteries in the world. But there are some fascinating clues peppered throughout its history. See, the Amber Room has been in a bit of a tug of war since its earliest days. It was originally crafted in the early 1700s in Prussia, known as Germany today, under the guidance of Baroque sculptor Andreas Schulter and amber craftsman Gottfried Wolfram. It stood proud in Berlin City Palace until 1716, when it was moved to the Catherine Palace in St. Petersburg. It was a grand gesture securing an alliance between Prussian King Frederick William I and Russian Tsar Peter the Great, the latter of which was undoubtedly very pleased with his shiny new gift. Standing at an impressive 590 square feet and containing over 6 tons of amber collected from around the world, this thing was nothing short of an absolute marvel in its time. When the amber-laden walls caught the sunlight just right, the whole room appeared to glow with a golden aura, giving it a genuinely supernatural, mesmerizing appearance to those lucky enough to witness it. But, as is the start of many unfortunate sentences, then World War II happened. As part of their invasion of Russia, those diabolical German fascists we all know and hate raided the Catherine Palace from top to bottom. In 1941, the contents of the room were carted off to Königsberg, a German-occupied town, which rather unfortunately became the target for a very intense series of bombings by the Allies in 1944 and 45. The castle in which the Amber Room's contents were being stored was largely destroyed, and it's here that all records of the room's treasures' whereabouts come to an end. When the final remnants of the site were completely demolished by Soviet leadership in the 60s, any hopes of recovering treasure from the ruins were crushed. A popular idea among historians holds that the room's contents were destroyed, but not everyone's convinced. Many believe that the room's contents were moved prior to this destruction, either pilfered by the Allied forces or snuck away across Europe by the Germans. More specifically, it's been suggested that certain German vessels which were sunk during the war contained the room's valuables. One such example is the MV Wilhelm Gustloff transport ship sunk by a Soviet submarine in the Baltic Sea in 1945, which some historians theorize was transporting some of the Amber Room's treasures, leaving them to succumb to the elements of the seabed. Unfortunately, diving access to the wreck is heavily restricted by the Polish government, and no official reports have hinted at the treasure trove being found on board. Let me know if you buy that official story down in the comments. Either way, despite countless theories and extensive searches and excavations across Europe, the Amber Room's whereabouts remain officially unknown, if they still exist at all. Whether it was destroyed, hidden, or lost at sea, the mystery of the Amber Room continues to captivate historians and treasure hunters alike. So if you find it, let me know, won't you? Let's move on to another piece of missing craftsmanship now. In 2006, the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, Spain, noticed something remarkable about one of their art pieces. It had turned invisible. Well, either that or somehow they'd managed to lose a $200,000, 38-ton steel sculpture that they'd had in storage since 1990. The piece, by sculptor Richard Serra, consisted of 4 steel blocks. Really tremendous stuff. The sculpture was supposed to be in the care of specialist art storage company Macron S.A. But in 2005, when the museum's new director decided to bring the piece out of retirement, the warehouse owners informed them that there may be some difficulties in its return. The difficulties being that they couldn't actually find the $200,000 giant steel sculpture and that the company responsible didn't technically exist anymore. They dissolved in 1998. Culminating in the government seizing their storage warehouse. However, when the organization now managing the warehouse were asked about Sarah's work, it was nowhere to be seen. Nor was there any documentation relating to it after 1992. It seemed a little fishy. So the case was brought to a police task force dedicated to high-value art theft, but nothing was ever found. Honestly, the way the sculpture looked, I wouldn't be surprised if it was sold as scrap metal. Let's seriously ramp things up in scale now. The mighty Himalayas are home to 10 of the 14 highest mountain peaks in the world, including all 29,032 feet of Everest herself. But 900 years ago, another peak dominated the Himalayas, one which, at over 26,000 feet, was a close second to Everest. If you've ever felt bad about losing your keys or wallet, don't, because the Himalayas somehow lost the second tallest mountain in the world. Impressive. After months of comparing rock sediment in the foothills and streams across the Annapurna area of Nepal, geologists concluded in 2023 that an absolutely colossal collapse occurred in this region. They estimated that around 1190, a huge landslide, either triggered by melting ice or a tremendous earthquake, brought down a gigantic mountain. We can only imagine the carnage this caused, as millions of tons of rock tumbled into the valley below at blistering speed. I mean, can you imagine one morning looking out across the distant mountain range and seeing the biggest mountain just crumble, ceasing to exist? That's a mind-blowing idea, but I think we can go bigger. This next missing object makes a mountain look like an ant. In 2019, astronomers pointed their telescopes toward a bright blue star in a galaxy lovingly named PHL 293b. They'd been studying this blue wonder, which burns 2.5 million times brighter than our sun, since the early 2000s. And I'm sure they were very excited to check in on their old solar friend, but there was one problem. The massive star had vanished. Since the last time they checked on the PHL 293b in 2011, the star had disappeared from its registered galaxy. Some suggested the star must have suddenly gone supernova, exploding into cosmic dust, or even a black hole. But supernovae typically are very visible for a long time as their contents are spilled out into surrounding space. One happening in such short time seemed highly unlikely. So, could it be the earlier researchers missed certain telltale signs of an ongoing supernova, suggesting these cosmic explosions may be more dangerously unpredictable than expected? Or did something happen here that isn't so easy to explain? Could the star have been harvested for its energy by some super advanced distant civilization? Let's hope none of that's correct. I don't want to live in a world where our sun can just suddenly supernova out of anywhere. On that note, in life, there are some things you just take for granted. The sun, the trees, the sea. Oh, wait, what? The sea just vanished. Okay, well, sounds crazy, but in 2014, a fisherman in Uzbekistan attempted to head out to work only to find that the Aral Sea, the world's 4th largest lake, had completely dried up. Vast stretches of it, especially along its southern banks, were left as dry desert, robbing countless communities of work and livelihood. But how did a sea disappear? Well, in 1960, the lake rested comfortably at 175 feet above sea level and covered 26,300 square miles. Thousands of islands dotted its waters, some of which even had communities living on them. Geographically, the lake sat in Kazakhstan and ran along the Uzbekistan border. The two countries were so proud of their lake, they were all like, "Oh, look at our amazing lake." Then the Soviet Union was like, "You'll mean our lake," and drained it dry. They diverted the rivers away, channeling the water to distant Soviet cotton farms, aiming to vivify the surrounding deserts. After the fall of the Soviet Union in the 90s, the countries now once again responsible for the lake failed to collaboratively pull together a worthy plan to reduce the lake's serious shrinkage. Despite a few valiant efforts, by the turn of the century, the Aral Sea had transformed from this in 1964 to this in 2014. Check out this series of shots from 2000 to 2018. As you can see, despite efforts to halt the shrink with rising temperatures and continued heavy usage, the Aral Sea's evaporation continues to accelerate. And us humans are just about to lose a 5-million-year-old, ludicrously large body of water. It's predicted that soon the scarcely remaining evaporating waters will become too toxically salty to accommodate life at all. Most aquatic life and plant life will be lost, as will the jobs and communities of those who currently depend on the area's waters for their jobs. Wow. A sea, arguably the most tragically enormous thing to misplace. Now, where'd I leave my keys? For more gigantic things dramatically going missing, check out my video about the biggest things ever stolen. Thanks for tuning in as always, and I'll catch you next time.